Welcome to Echoes of Ihsan, where we like to take these deep dives into sources that you send to us.
Absolutely.
And today we are opening up Sunan Abu Dawud,
Oh, very nice.
book 27 on clothing.
Right.
And, this is a collection of hadith sayings and practices of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Right.
And you might think clothing's like a really mundane, everyday topic.
Yeah, you would think.
But when you really get into these hadiths, you see there's a whole other layer of meaning, like connecting it to faith
Yeah.
and character and how we interact with other people.
Absolutely.
It's really interesting.
What I think is so fascinating about it is that Islam it emphasizes intention and mindfulness in every aspect of life, even something as simple as getting dressed.
Totally. And like one thing that really caught my eye was Hadith 4009. It's about a prayer that you say when you put on new clothes.
Oh, wow.
You've ever heard of that?
I have, yeah.
Okay, so it says, O Allah, praise be to thee as thou hast clothed me with it. I ask thee for its good and the good of that for which it was made, and I seek refuge in thee from its evil and the evil of that for which it was made. I never thought about praying when I get dressed. Like, what's the deeper meaning?
Yeah. So I think it's a really powerful reminder to be grateful for the blessings that we have, and we often take our clothes for granted. But if you think about it for a second, like think about how much effort went into making the clothes that you're wearing right now, from the farmers who grew the cotton to the weavers, the tailors, the factory workers, the truck drivers who transported it and the shopkeepers who sold it to you.
Yeah, like this whole chain.
Exactly. It's a reminder of how interconnected we are and how much impact even our seemingly small choices have on other people.
Yeah, it's like taking a moment to appreciate all that went into having that shirt on your back.
Absolutely. And I think it goes even deeper than just being grateful for the physical garment itself, but it's also about seeking God's blessings on how we use it. We're asking for the good of the garment, that it serves its purpose well, that it protects us, and that it doesn't become a source of pride or ostentation.
Right.
And we're also seeking refuge from its evil, that it doesn't lead us to vanity or extravagance or comparing ourselves to others.
That's really insightful. It's like you're doing this mini meditation before you step out into the world. You're reminding yourself of your intentions and how you want to carry yourself.
Exactly. You're turning a simple act into a spiritual practice. It's a way to connect with something bigger than yourself.
Now, on the topic of intention, there are a lot of hadith that talk about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his clothing choices. And I was struck by the contrast between Hadith 4014 and 4015, which mentioned his fondness for shirts, like he likes shirts.
Interesting.
And then 4025, which describes his simple clothes at the time of his death.
Right. And that, I think, speaks to the whole concept of zuhd in Islam, which is often translated as asceticism, but it's not really about deprivation.
Yeah.
Or rejecting worldly things altogether. It's more about detachment from material possessions and not letting them define you.
So it's not about wearing rags and living in a cave.
Right. Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
It's more about recognizing that true wealth lies in our connection with God and in the good deeds that we perform. And, the Prophet, peace be upon him, he could appreciate a beautiful garment. There's a Hadith 4023 where he accepts a gift of fine clothes. But he didn't cling to these things. He understood that they were temporary, and he didn't let them become a source of attachment or pride for him.
And that is so relevant, especially today when we're bombarded with messages about what to buy and how to look.
Absolutely. It's like questioning, why are we buying certain clothes? What message are we trying to send? Are we seeking validation from others, or are we dressing in a way that aligns with our values?
Those are hard questions.
They are.
And it makes me think about simple living. What does that even mean today? Is it about owning less, or is it more about shifting our mindset?
I think it's a deeply personal journey, and it can mean different things for different people. For some, it might involve minimizing their possessions or focusing on experiences rather than material goods.
Yeah.
For others, it might be about choosing ethically produced clothing or mending clothes instead of throwing them away, or simply being content with what they have. It's about finding that balance that feels right for you and allows you to focus on what truly matters.
Now let's talk about silk, because this is something that came up a lot.
Okay.
Some hadith, 4029, seem to just totally forbid it for men. And then others 4043 are well, there's exceptions if it's just a border or woven in. It seems contradictory.
It can seem that way at first glance, but this is where understanding the nuances of Islamic law is really crucial.
Okay.
So the general prohibition on silk for men is based on a few principles. One is avoiding extravagance. Silk was a luxury fabric, and wearing it could be seen as a form of ostentation, which is discouraged in Islam. And another principle is maintaining a distinction between men's and women's attire. And silk was often associated with feminine dress at that time.
So there's like a reason behind it?
Yeah, it's not just a random rule, it's connected to these deeper values.
But then how do you explain the exceptions?
Well, Islamic law often considers context and necessity.
Okay.
So, for example, Hadith 4045
Yeah.
mentions an exception for medical reasons. If someone has a skin condition that's irritated by certain fabrics, silk might be permissible.
Okay.
Or if a garment contains a very small amount of silk, it might not fall under that prohibition.
So it's about understanding the spirit of the law and not just the letter of the law.
Exactly.
But doesn't that make things more complicated? Like, how do you know when an exception applies?
It does require, seeking knowledge and understanding the reasoning behind the rulings, and scholars have debated these issues for centuries. And there are different opinions and interpretations. So the key is to learn from reliable sources, to consult with knowledgeable scholars, and to strive to apply the principles in a way that aligns with your understanding and your conscience.
So approach it with humility and a willingness to learn.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of personal responsibility and making informed choices.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
That's not always a simple answer.
wow. It's amazing how much depth there is to even like the simplest aspects of Islamic teachings. We've been talking about these hadith from Sunan Abu Dawud, book 27 on clothing. And I'm curious what else is in there? Like what else caught your eye?
So, we were talking about like the types of fabric and, the reasoning behind choosing certain fabrics over others, but there's some really fascinating hadith about colors.
Okay.
And like it seems that even color preferences weren't overlooked.
That's so interesting. I've always wondered about the significance of colors in Islam. Are certain colors like more favorable than others?
There are definitely some interesting preferences that are mentioned. So, for example, in Hadith 4053, it states that the Prophet, peace be upon him, loved yellow.
Really?
And Abdullah ibn Umar, one of his companions, he describes seeing him dyeing his clothes with yellow dye, including his turban.
Oh, wow. So yellow was like a particular favorite.
Yeah, it seems that way. What about other colors?
Yeah. Are there any other ones that are like mentioned?
Well, green is mentioned very favorably as well.
Okay.
So in Hadith 4054, it describes the Prophet, peace be upon him, wearing green garments.
Makes sense. Green, paradise, nature, tranquility, it seems fitting.
Absolutely. It's like wearing a symbol of peace and spiritual renewal.
Yeah. Are there any colors that were like discouraged?
So there's a set of hadith about red that I found really interesting.
Right.
So Hadith 4055, it recounts this incident where the Prophet, peace be upon him, saw Abdullah ibn al-Ais, and he was wearing this reddish yellow garment. And it's described as being like the color of saffron or pomegranate blossoms. So you can imagine this like really vibrant hue.
Okay.
And the Prophet, peace be upon him, he inquires about it. And Abdullah, sensing his disapproval, immediately goes home and throws it in the fire.
Wow, he burned it.
That burns it. Yeah. So red, it seems that it was not a favored color, at least for men.
Do we know why?
Well, Hadith 4057 kind of sheds light on the reasoning behind it. So when the Prophet, peace be upon him, he finds out that Abdullah has burned this garment, he asks, why did you not give it to one of your women to wear? For there is no harm in it for women.
Oh, so the discouragement was specifically for men wearing red.
That seems to be the case, and this idea is further emphasized in Hadith 4086, where the Prophet, peace be upon him, he actually curses those who engaged in imitating the opposite gender.
Okay, so maintaining those distinctions was really important.
It seems so.
But wait, didn't we come across a hadith earlier about the Prophet, peace be upon him, wearing red?
You're absolutely right.
I'm pretty sure we did.
Yeah, so there's Hadith 4061. It describes Al-Bara ibn Azib seeing the Prophet, peace be upon him, in a red robe and even commenting on its beauty. And then there's Hadith 4062. It describes Amir seeing the Prophet, peace be upon him, wearing red while he's delivering a sermon. So these instances seem to contradict the earlier hadith about red being discouraged for men.
So how do we reconcile this?
Well, again, this is where the scholarly interpretation and the importance of context really come into play.
Hmm.
Some scholars propose that maybe the prohibition was specific to certain shades of red, especially those that were associated with like extravagance or royalty. So think like deep crimson scarlet, those colors that were often worn by rulers or those seeking to display wealth and power.
So maybe it's not about the color itself, but the message that it's conveying.
Exactly. And other scholars suggest that the context in which red was worn was important, so maybe casual wear was discouraged for men, but there might have been exceptions for specific occasions or situations like religious gatherings or delivering a sermon.
It's fascinating how even something as seemingly straightforward as color choice has these layers of meaning and interpretation.
It does. It's like it reminds me of when we were talking about silk earlier. It's not always black and white.
So we talked about the prophet's fondness for shirts. What other details do we know about, like, his personal clothing style?
So Hadith 4016 offers a glimpse into that. It describes Asma, the daughter of Yazid, and she describes the sleeves of his shirt reaching his wrists.
Okay.
And you might think, okay, well, that's not that big of a deal, but, it gives you a picture of his everyday attire.
A practical length, not too short, not too long.
Exactly. And speaking of practicality, Hadith 4122, it mentions that his sandals had 2 thongs.
Okay.
So a very simple and functional design.
So different from the elaborate footwear we see today.
Right. It's a really refreshing kind of image.
Yeah, and even his bedding, Hadith 4135, describes his bedding as being made of leather stuffed with palm fiber.
Right. So, really highlighting a life focused on essentials rather than material comforts. But, despite this emphasis on simplicity, cleanliness was also very highly valued.
Oh,
So there's Hadith 4051. It narrates an incident where the Prophet, peace be upon him, saw a man with disheveled hair and another wearing dirty clothes. And he remarked, "Could this man not find something to make his hair lie down? And could this man not find something to wash his garments with?"
so it's not about rejecting all forms of personal grooming or care for one's appearance.
Not at all. It's about finding that balance between simplicity and maintaining cleanliness and a presentable appearance. It's a reminder that taking care of ourselves and our belongings is also a form of respect.
This is so fascinating. It's like piecing together this puzzle, getting a glimpse into the prophet's life and values through these everyday details.
Absolutely.
I'm excited to see what else we uncover in the next part.
Yeah, me too. There's still so much more to explore in Book 27 of Sunan Abu Dawud.
Yeah.
It's really remarkable how much wisdom there is about the Islamic perspective on clothing and adornment.
We've been on this journey through Sunan Abu Dawud, and it's amazing how these everyday choices can have so much meaning and reflect, like, deeper values.
It really is.
Now, speaking of guidance, I'm curious to know more about head coverings. We touched on turbans earlier. Were there, like, specific guidelines on how to wear them?
There are a few hadith that shed light on this. So, for instance, Hadith 46:5 mentions the Prophet, peace be upon him, wearing a black turban when he entered Makkah during the year of conquest.
Okay.
And then in 4066, his companion Amr ibn Hurayth, he describes seeing him on the pulpit delivering a sermon while wearing a black turban with the ends hanging down between his shoulders.
Oh, wow. So you can really picture it.
Right, you can really imagine it.
So turbans seemed like they were like a common head covering for men back then.
They were, yeah.
Was there like a particular way to wrap it that was like considered more Islamic?
There were definitely distinctions in how turbans were worn. So
Good.
Hadith 4067 highlights a key difference between Muslims and polytheists back then.
Okay.
So Ali ibn Rukana, narrating from his father, he recounts hearing the Prophet, peace be upon him, say that the distinguishing feature was that Muslims wore their turbans over caps.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's like the simple detail becomes this visual marker.
Yeah, of like identity and belonging.
Exactly. Clothing can be such a powerful symbol of faith and community.
Yeah, totally. And it goes even further in Hadith 4068. It describes how the Prophet, peace be upon him, put a turban on Abdurrahman ibn Auf, one of his companions,
Yeah.
and he carefully wrapped it, letting the ends hang down, both in front and behind Abdurrahman. So it's not just like throwing it on your head.
Right, there's an art to it.
It makes me wonder, were there any other hadith that talk about how to, like, properly wear your garments?
You're right to ask that Hadith 4069, it specifically mentions 2 styles of wearing clothes that were forbidden by the Prophet, peace be upon him.
Okay, what are those?
So first, he prohibits sitting with one's private parts exposed while wearing a single garment wrapped around the knees.
Okay.
And then second, wearing a garment with one side uncovered while draping it over the shoulders, leaving one arm and shoulder bare.
Okay, so both of those were forbidden.
They were, yeah. It was probably seen as like immodest or disrespectful, especially in public settings.
Yeah, just like basic decency, right?
Exactly. And there's another prohibition in Hadith 4070.
Right.
The Prophet, peace be upon him, he forbids a man from completely wrapping himself in a garment with his hands hidden inside.
I wonder why that was discouraged.
The Hadith doesn't explicitly say, but you can imagine it might have been seen as like suspicious or secretive,
Yeah.
potentially raising concerns about, potential wrongdoing.
It's remarkable how even those like really minor details of dress were like given consideration.
Yeah.
So we talked about modesty and covering for women.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any like more specific guidelines in this book about the length or style of women's garments?
So we find more details in Hadith 4105. It's a conversation between Salama, one of the Prophet's wives,
Okay.
and the Prophet, peace be upon him.
Okay.
Salama, she inquires about the appropriate length for a woman's garment, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, initially he says it could hang down a span.
A span, what is that?
So a span is the distance between the tip of your thumb and the tip of your little finger when your hand is fully stretched out.
Okay, I see.
So if you spread your hand as wide as you can, that's roughly a span.
But wouldn't that be kind of short? Like, wouldn't your feet be uncovered?
Yeah, and it seems that Salama had the same thought,
Huh?
because the hadith goes on to say that she points out to the Prophet, peace be upon him, that a span-length garment would leave the feet exposed,
Yeah.
and so he then clarifies that it could be a forearm's length, but no longer than that.
Oh, so a little bit longer.
Right, so like from your elbow to your wrist.
Okay, I see.
It provides more coverage.
So it's like balancing that modesty, but also practicality.
Absolutely.
Now let's move on to something that I found really interesting, which is the use of animal skins for clothing and other purposes. I remember reading a hadith about the permissibility of using skins from animals that had died naturally.
You're talking about Hadith 4108?
Yeah.
And it describes this incident where a sheep belonging to a client of Maimuna, one of the Prophet's wives, had died, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, he saw this dead sheep, and he asked why they hadn't tanned its skin to make use of it, and they explained that the sheep had died a natural death.
So they thought it was like forbidden to use the skin.
Right, and he clarified that it was only the consumption of the animal that was prohibited, not the use of its skin, and he even added that the process of tanning the skin purified it.
Oh, wow. So resourceful.
Exactly, avoiding waste.
Yeah, using every part of the animal.
It shows respect for the animal and a practical approach.
Mhm.
But there are other hadiths that seem to contradict this ruling,
Lovely.
so there's a bit of confusion about this.
Like what kind of contradictions?
So, for example, Hadith 4115 mentions this letter from the Prophet, peace be upon him, to the people of Juhayna,
Okay.
which is a tribe in Arabia, and it specifically forbids them from using the skin or the sinew of an animal that had died a natural death.
Okay, so that's the opposite.
It seems to be right.
How do we make sense of that?
So again, scholarly interpretation and context are key.
Right.
Some scholars suggest that maybe the permissibility of using skins from animals that had died naturally might have been like a later ruling,
Okay.
perhaps due to changing circumstances or needs.
Makes sense.
Maybe there was a time when it was necessary to use all available resources, even those from animals that hadn't been slaughtered in the prescribed Islamic manner.
Yeah, that's possible.
And other scholars, they propose that the prohibition in 4115 might have been specific to certain types of animals or situations.
Okay.
Maybe there were health concerns, or it was meant to prevent the spread of disease.
So again, that nuance and context,
Exactly.
it's not always straightforward.
It's not, and it really emphasizes the need to seek guidance from knowledgeable scholars to help us understand and apply these teachings in the right way.
This deep dive has been so enlightening. We've covered so much, from the spiritual significance of getting dressed to like the specifics of fabrics and colors and head coverings and even animal skins. It's amazing.
Yeah, I agree.
What final thoughts do you have for our listeners about what we learned from these hadiths?
I think the main thing is that clothing in Islam, it's about so much more than just covering our bodies. It's about modesty, it's about gratitude, it's about simplicity, it's about reflecting the values of our faith.
Absolutely.
And these hadith, they encourage us to be mindful of our choices, to be mindful of our intentions and the impact that our actions have on ourselves and on others.
So well said. It's like aligning our outward appearance with our inward state.
Exactly.
And thank you for joining us on this journey through Book 27 of Sunan Abu Dawud.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you found these insights to be helpful and that they inspire you to like reflect on your own choices and approach the world with more awareness and intention.
Absolutely.